Hello, Witsit first graders. Mr. Saul here, and today we're going to keep talking about the sun in our science class. That's why I'm wearing my fancy sunglasses, because it is really bright outside. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. We're going to go through some lessons from Florida Virtual Learning School, and I'm going to leave some places for your teachers to pause and kind of talk to you guys, answer some questions. So here we go. Let me share my screen. Whoops, stop. I did that wrong. Oh dear. All right, here we go. I got it. Share screen. All right, so the heating earth. Standing in the direct sunlight, Carmen and Malik can really feel the heat from the sun. It's time to find some shade, but how does blocking the sunlight affect how hot it feels? Let's investigate. So what are we planning on learning in this lesson? Well, we want to investigate the effects of indirect sunlight on the temperature of soil, air, and water. We want to measure the effects of indirect sunlight on the temperature of soil, air, and water. And we want to explain these effects, the same thing. So we're going to investigate, measure, and explain. Investigate is where we learn more about it. Measure is where we put numbers on how much something is. So if it's big, we might say it's this many feet. Or if it's small, we might say it's this many inches, or since we're talking about the sun, we're probably going to be talking about temperature. And finally, we're going to explain this. So I need to be able to tell other people about what I've learned, okay? Now, one word that you might have heard a couple of times is the effects of indirect sunlight. Well, they already gave us a clue about what indirect means. Let's look back up here at the picture. Standing in the direct sunlight, Carmen and Malik can really feel the heat from the sun. They have nothing blocking the sun from hitting them. Oh, sorry, you guys can't see that. So here we see that Carmen and Malik have nothing blocking the sun from hitting them, right? They are in direct sunlight. They're right in the way of it. It's time to find some shade. If you find shade, are you standing in the sun anymore? No, you're not in the sun. So you're not in direct sunlight. You are in indirect sunlight. So indirect sunlight means shade, means you're blocking the sun somehow. It could be, I have my sunglasses to block the sun. It could be that I have my big sun hat to block the sun. And if I really want to stay cool, I can probably do both. Oh, wow, I look really good. Nice. Okay, so indirect sunlight is sunlight that is partly blocked by something before it reaches an object. For example, if you are walking on a trail through the trees on a sunny day, the trees partly block the sun's rays from the path. What are some other examples of indirect sunlight? So here I see that trail picture where there's some spots of sun and some spots of shade. It's probably going to be a lot cooler there in the shade. Over here, I will pause so that the teachers can ask what's going on in this picture and what's going on in this picture. Well, how are these examples of indirect sunlight? There are other examples of indirect sunlight too, like the sunlight under a cloud or an umbrella, or the sunlight in the shadow of a building, trees, or a tent. That's right, Malik. Some of my favorite spots are in indirect sunlight. I wonder whether or not indirect sunlight warms land. What do you guys think? Does indirect sunlight warm up the land? That's an interesting question. Select each card to flip it over and learn more about the different places that Carmen found indirect sunlight. Carmen is standing on a part of the path where there is indirect sunlight. The soil in this area will not be as warm as the soil in direct sunlight, but the sun still warms it. So what they're saying there is even if you're in shade, it's still going to be a little warm because the sun is out. You ever notice how it gets a lot cooler at night than it was during the day? That's because the sun is on the other side of the world, and now the cool side, the night side, the temperature is going to drop. So even when the sun is out and you're standing in the shade, that shady area is still going to get warmed up by the sun. All right, back to sharing. All right, so Carmen is standing on a part of the path where she's in direct sunlight. The soil in this area will not be as warm, but the sun will still warm it. All right, here she's standing on a shaded part of the street. This area does not have direct sunlight on it, so the temperature of the concrete will not be as hot as the concrete that has direct sunlight. In this one, she's standing in a grassy area with a lot of trees. The temperature on the ground where she's standing is lower because there's only indirect sunlight shining there. The areas with direct sunlight would be much warmer. Okay. Changes in temperature. I wonder how direct and indirect sunlight affects the soil. I think the temperature will be different, but I think I need to test it to be sure. How can I measure this? My friend Jacob can help. You're right, Carmen. We can measure the temperature of the soil using a thermometer. You can measure the temperature of soil in both direct sunlight and indirect sunlight. So when they talk about temperature, once again, they're talking about how hot or cold something feels. And a thermometer is this yellow thing right here. This is a way for us to measure or put numbers on a temperature of something. So if the temperature is very low, like at 0, that means it would be freezing. And if it's really high up here, 30 or 40, then it would be really hot. Now, this is in degrees Celsius, which is the temperature measurement that most people use. To measure the temperature, place the thermometer about 3 centimeters, that's about this far, deep into the soil. You're going to wait a few minutes, then check the temperature on the thermometer. Remember to always record the temperature in degrees Celsius. For example, the thermometer above reads 23 degrees Celsius. So this is just like in my video with the egg. I was using my thermometer and I was checking the temperature of that pavement and we saw that it was 117 degrees. Very, very hot. So I'll include another video where I check the temperature of places in the shade versus in the sun. Okay. Now that you've seen, yes, this is an activity where you can check the temperature in indirect sunlight and soil. This is a fun activity for you, something you can do at home. Your teacher will let you know about that. All right, self-check and review. With the help of Carmen, Malik, and Jacob, you've learned about indirect sunlight. Continue to practice what you know with this next activity. The path in this image is receiving indirect sunlight. True or false? If you said true, that is correct, because I see parts of shade and parts of sun. That means it is indirect. The sand on this beach is receiving indirect sunlight. That is false. I see 0 shade or shadows on this beach. If you use a thermometer to measure the temperature of the air on the path and then measure the temperature of the air under the tree, they would be the same. So the question is it the same temperature out here on the path or under the tree? So they're saying that it would be the same, and we know that that is not true. All right, very good. Finding the shade. We'll let that picture load. There we go. It is really hot in direct sunlight. I'm having fun playing at the park, but I think I need a break. Where should we go to get out of the direct sunlight? We can go in the shade under trees. When we are in the shade under a tree, we are in indirect sunlight. The air still feels warm. I wonder whether the pond water in the shade is warm too. Carmen and Malik are in a shaded area under some trees. They are in indirect sunlight. The temperature still feels warm because the sun's energy is still warming up the air and land around them. Malik and Carmen are swimming in the pond that is shaded by the trees around it. The water in the pond still has a warm temperature. The sun is still shining all around them and heating the air and the water around them. Even when you are in indirect sunlight, the temperature can still feel warm. That is because the direct sunlight is still shining and warming up the air, the water, and the land around you. Okay, here's an optional write like a scientist practice. Your teacher will let you know. All right, indirect sunlight. That makes sense. Even when we are in the shade, the sun is still shining all around us and warming the air, water, and soil. I wonder whether we can measure the temperature of the air and water in indirect sunlight. Carmen's friend Jacob can help. You can measure the temperature in air and water in indirect sunlight, Malik. The process is the same as how you measured the temperature of the air and water that was in direct sunlight. I will show you. So here we have Jacob putting the thermometer in a cup of water when it's in indirect sunlight. So he's probably got it inside the house, out of the shade, or out of the sun and in the shade. Same thing over here. He's measuring the temperature of the air. You can see that he has the thermometer hanging and it's in the shade. So he's measuring it at a spot that is not in direct sunlight. Here's another activity where you can record. Your teacher will let you know. All right, so we've learned that even in indirect sunlight, the temperature of the air, water, and soil can still be very warm. That is because the sun is still shining and heating everything up, and heat likes to spread out. With the help of Carmen, Malik, and Jacob, we are able to investigate the difference in temperatures of water, air, and soil in indirect sunlight and in a dark room or space. You measured the temperature using a thermometer and recorded the difference. So we investigated, we measured, and we explained. All right. You've learned a lot about indirect sunlight and the difference in temperature of an object in indirect sunlight as opposed to something in direct sunlight. Continue to practice what you know with this next activity. These banana trees are providing some shade to the area. Is this an example of direct or indirect sunlight? What effect will this have on the temperature of the air in this area? This is an example of indirect sunlight. The indirect sunlight is not as strong as direct sunlight, so it still warms the air. The effect that the indirect sunlight will have is that it'll warm the air. This river has trees around it that are providing some shade to the water. Is the water receiving direct or indirect sunlight? What effect does this have on the temperature of the water? If you said that it's in indirect sunlight and that it'll still be warmed up, you were correct. The water will not be as warm as water that's in direct sunlight. All right, friends. Thank you so much for participating in this awesome lesson. I'm about to go record another video for you guys where I'm going to go measure some things out in my yard with my digital thermometer that I used in my cooking an egg video. So we're going to do that. Make sure that you remind your teacher to show you that video next.